They looked like the hand of God coming down County Road 12. From a distance, the illusion was perfect. The high-gloss white paint of the sedan, the tactical silhouette of the uniforms, and that rhythmic, hypnotic strobe of blue and red light bars. To anyone else, it was the law. To me, it was a 3,000-pound rolling lie. I stood on the porch of the house my father expanded, the same house where I'd spent 62 years learning that the dirt beneath my boots was the only thing worth dying for. For months, I had been the stubborn old man in Victor Harmon's way. I was the 80-acre obstacle preventing his Phase 2 expansion of Ridgewood Estates. He wanted my heritage, my memories, and the very hill where my wife, Helen, is buried. He offered $4.5 million, but you can't put a price on a promise made to the dying. When the money didn't work, Harmon brought out the shadows. He didn't just hire guards, he built a private army under the name Ridgewood Security Services. He dressed them in props from a Halloween store and told them to break me. The first time they drove through my ranch without permission, I actually stepped aside. I thought it was a mistake. By the sixth time, the official business was clear. It was psychological warfare. They tore through my pastures, ripping ruts into the land my grandfather bought in 1947. One of them even had the audacity to urinate on my fence post while staring directly into my camera lens, marking my territory as his own. But today, the game of follow the leader was ending. At exactly 2:17 p.m., my phone chimed. The motion alert from my new $600 high-definition camera system showed two vehicles turning onto my drive, the white sedan and a black SUV with tinted windows. They weren't just trespassing anymore. They were making a statement of ownership. I walked down the drive, not with a shotgun or a shout, but with the cold, calculated patience of a man who had already filed his paperwork. I stopped 50 feet back and watched. Derek Sloan was behind the wheel of the sedan. I could see his sunglasses reflecting the Texas sun, his posture radiating the kind of arrogance that only comes from wearing a fake badge. He didn't slow down. Not for the signs that clearly stated private property. Not for the legal warnings I'd spent all night ensuring met every Texas state standard for lettering and size. And certainly not for the 6 bright yellow steel posts rising from the ground like sentinels. Derek accelerated. The engine roared, pushing the sedan to 35 mph. He likely thought they were plastic pylons or decorative markers. He thought he had authority. The impact wasn't a thud, it was an apocalypse of sound. The front end of the sedan hit the first bollard and disintegrated. Metal screamed as the frame folded like aluminum foil around a fist. Glass exploded in a glittering spray, and the airbags deployed with a muffled thump that signaled the end of Victor Harmon's reign of intimidation. The black SUV behind it slammed on its brakes, tires screeching, but the momentum carried it straight into the sedan's rear, sandwiching the fake law enforcement vehicle against the immovable steel. Steam hissed from the crumpled hood. The blue and red lights were still flashing, flickering against the yellow steel that hadn't moved an inch. Derek crawled out of the wreckage, his face a roadmap of cuts and confusion. He looked at his destroyed car, then at the Bollards, and finally at me. The tough guy was gone, replaced by a bleeding trespasser who realized too late that steel doesn't care about a fake uniform. "You set a trap," he screamed, his voice cracking. I didn't blink, I just held up my phone, recording the fallout in 4K resolution. "No, Derek," I said, my voice level and hard. "I set a boundary. You're just the one who decided to break yourself against it." To understand why I was willing to turn my driveway into a graveyard for Ford Interceptors, you have to understand the dirt. This isn't just real estate. In the Texas Hill Country, land is a living diary. My grandfather, Silas Sterling, spent 15 years in the brutal heat of the Permian Basin oil fields, saving every cent just to buy these 80 acres in 1947. He built the original barn with his bare hands, post by post, nail by nail. My father expanded the ranch, and I spent 62 years sweating into this soil. But for Victor Blackwood, my life's work was just undeveloped acreage on a topographical map. Victor is the CEO of Blackwood Developments, A man who wears $3,000 suits to stand in the mud and tells you he's doing you a favor by taking your home. He'd already bought out the Miller farm to my east and the Henderson ranch to my north. He transformed those beautiful rolling hills into Blackwood Estates, a sea of identical gray houses with HOA rules that tell you what color your mailbox has to be. The first time Victor came to my porch, he was all smiles and expensive cologne. "Arthur," he said, leaning against my porch railing like he owned it. "I'm offering you $4.5 million. Think of the retirement. Florida, a condo, no more fixing fences in the July heat." I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Victor, my wife Evelyn is buried on that ridge. I promised her she'd always have the best view of the sunset. Do they have sunsets like that in Florida condos?" The smile didn't just fade, it curdled. "Arthur, don't be a relic. Progress is coming. You can either be the man who cashes the check or the man who gets run over by the bulldozer." That was the day the war began. Victor didn't just want the land. He wanted to break the man who said no. He knew that if he could get me to sell, the rest of the holdouts in the county would crumble. A week after that meeting, the HOA cops appeared. At first, I was confused. I'd see a white sedan with a light bar sitting at the edge of my property line. Sometimes they'd drive halfway up my quarter-mile driveway, sit there for 10 minutes with the engine idling, and then peel out, throwing gravel everywhere. They wore tactical vests, duty belts, and badges that caught the light just right. I'm a law-abiding man. I've served on the county board for a decade. My first instinct was respect. I thought maybe there was a fugitive in the area or a border patrol issue. But when I'd walk down to ask if they needed assistance, they'd simply roll up the tinted windows and speed off, intentionally kicking up a cloud of dust that would coat my lungs and my cattle's feed. The psychological toll started to weigh on me. I'd wake up at 3:00 a.m. to the flicker of blue and red lights dancing on my bedroom walls. They weren't arresting anyone. They weren't serving warrants. They were patrolling my private property as if it were a public street, asserting a fake authority intended to make me feel like a stranger in my own home. I called the sheriff's department. "Sheriff Miller," I said, "your boys are spending a lot of time on my ranch lately. Is there something I should know?" There was a long pause on the other end. "Arthur, I don't have a single deputy out your way. We're short-handed as it is. If you're seeing lights, it isn't us." That's when the chill went down my spine. I went back to my security footage and zoomed in. I didn't see sheriff or police. In tiny silver lettering beneath the star, it read, "Blackwood Security Services." Victor hadn't sent the law. He had hired mercenaries, dressed them like officers, and told them to harass a 62-year-old man until he cracked. He wanted me to feel hunted. He wanted me to feel that the system was against me. What Victor didn't realize is that I know the law better than his hired thugs do. In Texas, impersonating a peace officer is a third-degree felony, and criminal trespass with a deadly weapon, which those guards were carrying, is even worse. Victor thought he was playing a game of chess. He didn't realize I was about to change the game to demolition derby. I realized then that I couldn't just tell them to leave. I had to make it physically impossible for them to stay. I picked up the phone and called a commercial contractor in Austin. "I need 6S30 rated steel bollards," I told him. "The kind they use at embassy entrances, and I need them installed by Tuesday." The trap was being set, not just with steel, but with the very greed Victor was trying to use against me. He thought he was the predator. He was about to find out what happens when the prey stops running and starts digging in. The thing about bullies like Victor Blackwood is that they rely on your ignorance. They expect you to be intimidated by the flashing lights and the tactical gear because most people are programmed to submit to anything that looks like the law. But Victor made a fatal mistake. He assumed that because I lived in a rural ranch, I didn't understand the complexities of the legal system. After my call with Sheriff Miller, the game changed. I wasn't just a rancher defending his dirt anymore. I was a man collecting evidence for a felony prosecution. I spent the next 3 days in what I call the war room. my small home office overlooking the main drive. I pulled every clip from my Ring cameras and the trail cams I'd hidden in the oak trees. I didn't just need footage of them driving, I needed footage of the impersonation. On Wednesday, the white sedan returned. This time I didn't hide. I walked down to the gate and stood right in the middle of the drive. The car came to a screeching halt just inches from my knees. The driver, a meathead with a buzz cut named Derek Sloan, stepped out. He was wearing a dark navy utility vest, a Glock 17 on his hip, and a silver star pinned to his chest that looked remarkably like a deputy's badge. "Sir, you're obstructing a security patrol," Derek barked, his hand resting on his holster. It was a classic intimidation move. "Is that right?" I asked, keeping my hands visible but my voice steady. "And who authorized this patrol on private property?" "This is an HOA-mandated safety sweep for the surrounding estates," he lied, stepping into my personal space. "We have reports of suspicious activity in this sector. You need to clear the way or I'll have to detain you for interference." I looked at the badge. Up close, I could see the words Blackwood Security Services etched in tiny, cramped letters around the star. "Derek," I said, reading his name tag. "Do you know the Texas Penal Code, Section 37.11? Impersonating a public servant is a degree felony. That badge, those lights, and that detain threat, you're walking a very thin line, son." He laughed, a dry, mocking sound. "Victor told me you were an armchair lawyer. Listen, old man, the HOA owns the easement rights to this road. We go where we want. Now move." He shoved me. It wasn't hard enough to knock me down, but it was hard enough to constitute assault under Texas law. He got back in his car, flicked on the sirens for a split second just to startle me, and roared past, intentionally clipping my mailbox with his side mirror. That was the moment I stopped being neighborly. I went inside and called my attorney, Marcus Vance. Marcus is the kind of lawyer who treats a courtroom like a battlefield. I told him about the shove, the HOA easement, lie, and the fake badges. "Arthur," Marcus said, his voice dropping into that serious tone he uses before he ruins someone's life. "They're trying to create a prescriptive easement. If they use that road long enough and you don't physically stop them, they can claim a legal right to it in court. That's how Victor plans to get your land. He won't buy it, he'll just make it his through usage." "How do I stop it legally?" I asked. "You have to enforce the boundary," Marcus explained. "Texas law says you have the right to protect your property with non-deadly mechanical devices as long as they are clearly marked. If you put up a gate, they'll just ram it or claim they have a key. You need something they can't argue with, something that says this road is closed without saying a word." That afternoon, the contractor arrived with a flatbed truck. On the back were 6 cylinders of heavy-duty grade S steel. These weren't your average parking lot posts. These were K-rated crash bollards, designed to stop a 15,000-pound truck traveling at 50 mph. We dug 4 feet down into the limestone. We poured high-si concrete. We reinforced the base with rebar that could hold up a bridge. I had the contractor paint them a bright, industrial yellow, impossible to miss unless you were intentionally trying to ignore them. Then I did the most important part. I placed 3 signs 100 feet apart leading up to the bollards. 1, private property, no trespassing. 2, authorized vehicles only, vehicle barriers in use. 3, final warning, dead end, high-strength bollards ahead. I took photos of every sign. I GPS tagged the coordinates. I sent the photos to the sheriff and to Victor Blackwood's office with a simple note. "The easement is closed, don't test the steel." I knew Victor would think it was a bluff. I knew Derek would think he could just drive around them or push through them. They were so blinded by their own fake power that they couldn't see the trap they had built for themselves. I sat on my porch that night, watching the sun dip below the ridge where Evelyn rested. The air was still. The yellow steel posts glowed in the twilight like silent guardians. "They're coming, Evelyn," I whispered, "and this time they aren't getting through." The morning after the bollards were installed, the air felt different. The yellow steel stood like silent, unbreakable soldiers at the mouth of my driveway. I knew the HOA cops wouldn't take this sitting down. Victor Blackwood was used to people folding the moment he raised his voice, and he had a whole department of security experts paid to be his fist. Around 10:00 a.m., a sleek black Mercedes SUV pulled up to the edge of my property. It didn't cross the line. The window rolled down and Victor himself stared at the bollards. He didn't look angry. He looked amused, like he was watching a child build a fort out of sofa cushions. He stepped out, leaning against the hood. "Arthur," he shouted toward the porch, "we need to talk about these obstructions." I walked down, meeting him at the line. I didn't open the gate. "They aren't obstructions, Victor. They're boundaries. There's a difference." "You're blocking an emergency access route," Victor said, his voice dropping into that fake, concerned citizen tone. "The Ridgewood Estates HOA charter clearly states that this old ranch road is a secondary fire lane. By putting these up, you're endangering lives. My lawyers will have a court order to rip these out by Monday, and you'll be stuck with the bill." I smiled. It was the first time I'd felt like smiling in weeks. "That's the thing about charters, Victor. They only apply to people inside the HOA. I never signed your papers. I never joined your little club. And as for the fire lane, I checked with the county fire marshal yesterday. This road isn't on their map. You lied to your buyers, and now you're trying to make your lie my problem." Victor's face tightened. The mask of the visionary developer was slipping, revealing the vulture underneath. "You think you're smart, don't you? You think a few pieces of scrap metal are going to stop a multi-million-dollar project? I have friends in the DA's office. I have the sheriff on speed dial." "Then call them," I said, "because I've already called the Texas Rangers about your boys in the white sedans. Impersonating a peace officer is a felony, Victor. I wonder how your investors will feel when their head of security is wearing a real orange jumpsuit instead of a fake blue one." He didn't answer. He just got back in his car and drove off, kicking up a spray of gravel. But I knew him. He wasn't going to the courthouse. He was going to his kennel to let his dogs off the leash. 2 hours later, Derek Sloan and his partner, a thick-necked guy named Tommy, arrived in the white sedan. They didn't even try to talk this time. They parked right in front of the Bollards and got out with a heavy-duty bolt cutter and a chain. "Victor says these are an illegal nuisance," Derek yelled, looping the chain around the center bollard. "We're hauling them out." I stood on my porch, holding my phone up, recording every second in high definition. "Derek, you are on camera. You are tampering with private property and trespassing. If you hook that chain to that car, you're responsible for what happens next." Derek flipped me off. He was convinced that the sedan's engine was stronger than my concrete. He hooked the other end of the chain to the car's frame and yelled at Tommy to floor it. The tires screamed. White smoke poured from the rear wheel wells as the rubber burned against the asphalt. The sedan shook, the frame groaning under the tension. But the bollard, it didn't even vibrate. We had anchored those things 4 feet deep into Texas limestone with 4,000 psi concrete. Snap! The chain didn't break. The sedan's rear bumper and a chunk of the frame did. The metal twisted and tore away with a sound like a gunshot, flying backward and smashing into the car's own trunk. Derek jumped out, cursing, looking at the back of his ruined vehicle. "You're gonna pay for that?" he screamed at me, shaking his fist. "I didn't pull the trigger, Derek. You did," I called back. They left, but the look in Derek's eyes told me this wasn't over. They were embarrassed now. And an embarrassed bully is the most dangerous kind. They weren't just trying to steal my land anymore. They wanted to hurt me. I went inside and loaded my magazines. Not because I wanted to use them, but because I knew that when the law is fake, the only thing that's real is how much ground you're willing to hold. The air in the hill country gets thin and cold after midnight, the kind of silence that amplifies every snapping twig and rustling leaf. I wasn't sleeping. I was sitting in my darkened living room, the only light coming from the bank of security monitors glowing on my desk. Victor Blackwood had gone quiet after the bumper incident, and in my experience, quiet men are the ones planning the loudest moves. Around 1:15 a.m., the infrared sensors on my perimeter fence pinged. Two figures were moving through the brush, avoiding the main driveway where the bollards stood like yellow tombstones. They were carrying heavy bags, tools, likely bolt cutters or maybe something worse. Through the grainy black and white thermal feed, I could see the heat signatures of Derek Sloan and Tommy. They weren't in their uniforms this time. They were wearing hoodies and tactical pants, looking more like the criminals they truly were. They reached the bollard line. I watched as they began to spray paint the lenses of my visible cameras. They thought they were being clever. What they didn't know was that for every visible camera, I had 2 trail cams hidden inside hollowed-out birdhouses and fence posts. They were being recorded in 4K from angles they couldn't even imagine. I watched Derek pull out a high-powered angle grinder. The sparks began to fly, a bright shower of orange against the Texas night. He was trying to cut through the steel. But these weren't hollow pipes. These were filled with reinforced, high-density concrete and a central rebar core. 5 minutes in, I saw him stop, shaking his hands from the vibration. He had barely made a scratch. That's when I decided to have a little fun. I have a localized PA system installed near the gate for deliveries. I leaned into the microphone. "Derek," my voice boomed through the trees, amplified and distorted by the night air. "That's a $400 diamond blade grinder. You're going to need about 20 more of those to get through one post, and you've got 5 more to go." Both men jumped so high they nearly tripped over their own feet. Tommy pulled his sidearm, a clear violation of his private security license, and began scanning the darkness. "I can see you, Tommy," I said, my voice calm but cold. "And so can the sheriff's server. Your faces, your tools, and that Glock in your hand are being uploaded to the cloud in real time. If you pull that trigger, you aren't just a trespasser anymore. You're a felon on a fast track to Huntsville." They froze. The psychological wall I'd built was proving to be just as impenetrable as the steel bollards. For a moment, I saw the hesitation in their body language. They were realized that Victor Blackwood wasn't there to protect them. He was in his $1 million mansion, likely sipping scotch, while they were out in the dirt, risking 20 years in prison for a man who didn't even know their last names. "Get off my land," I commanded. "The gate is open for your exit. If you're still here in 5 minutes, I'm releasing the hounds. And I don't mean dogs, I mean the legal kind." They didn't wait. They scrambled back to their black SUV parked on the shoulder of the county road and tore off, their headlights off to avoid detection. But the damage was done, not to my property, but to their morale. The next morning, I didn't wait for them to come to me. I took the footage, the thermal, the 4K birdhouse shots, and the audio of the grinder, and drove straight to the county prosecutor's office. I didn't just want a restraining order. I wanted a RICO investigation. If Victor was using a private security firm to harass landowners into selling, that was organized crime. As I walked out of the courthouse, I saw Victor's black Mercedes idling at a red light. I walked right up to his window and tapped on the glass. He rolled it down, his eyes hidden behind dark aviators. "The steel held Victor," I said. "And so did the cameras. I'd start looking for a good criminal defense attorney if I were you. Because Phase 2 of your project just became Exhibit A in a felony trial." The light turned green. He didn't say a word, but the way his knuckles whitened on the steering wheel told me everything I needed to know. The predator was finally realizing that he had bitten into something he couldn't chew. The atmosphere on the ranch was heavy, like the static in the air before a massive lightning strike. Victor Blackwood was cornered. The legal walls were closing in, his investors were panicking, and his security chief, Derek Sloan, had been humiliated. I knew they wouldn't just disappear into the night. Bullies like Victor don't go out with a whimper, they go out with a crash. It was a Tuesday, exactly 1 week after the bollards had been anchored into the earth. I was out near the barn, greasing the hinges on the tractor, when the familiar sound of a high-performance engine echoed from the county road. But this time, it wasn't just one engine. It was a roar. I looked at my phone. The gate cameras showed the white sedan, now with a makeshift rear bumper welded on and Victor's black SUV trailing close behind. They weren't idling this time. They weren't stopping to look at the signs. They were coming in hot. Derek was behind the wheel of the sedan, and even from the low-res preview, I could see the mania in his posture. He had been told to clear the obstruction once and for all. He likely believed that if he hit the gate with enough momentum, the cheap, yellow posts would snap like toothpicks. He didn't understand the difference between decorative iron and S-30 rated anti-ram steel. "Arthur, get back!" I shouted to myself, even though I was the only one there. I retreated behind the thick stone wall of the old smokehouse about 50 yards from the gate. Derek floored it. The white sedan's speedometer must have been climbing past 35, maybe hitting 40 mph. The blue and red lights were screaming, a strobe of fake authority cutting through the afternoon dust. He was committed. He was going to ram his way into Phase 2 of Blackwood Estates. The sound that followed was something I will never forget. It wasn't the sound of a car crash. It was the sound of physics reclaiming the land. Boom! The sedan didn't go through the bollards. It didn't even move them. The front bumper hit the center post and simply ceased to exist. In a fraction of a second, the engine block was shoved into the dashboard. The frame of the car buckled upward, the rear wheels lifting 3 feet off the ground from the sheer force of the sudden stop. Glass rained down like diamonds, and the shrieking of tearing metal filled the valley. But the chaos wasn't over. Victor, following too closely in his heavy black SUV, couldn't react in time. He slammed into the back of the sedan, his own airbags deploying with a series of muffled explosions. The black SUV's front end crushed the sedan's trunk, sandwiching Derek and Tommy inside a coffin of twisted white metal. Silence followed. A long, ringing silence broken only by the hiss of escaping steam and the pathetic chirp-chirp of a broken alarm system. I didn't run down there, I didn't scream. I just pulled out my phone and dialed the real authorities. "Sheriff Miller, it's Arthur. You better bring the paramedics and a heavy-duty tow truck to my front gate. The trash just took itself out." As I walked down the drive, I saw the center bollard. The bright yellow paint was scuffed, and there was a smear of white paint from the sedan's grille. But the steel was straight. The concrete hadn't cracked. It stood there, a 42-inch tall testament to the fact that some things, like a man's word in a man's land, are not for sale. Derek was slumped over the steering wheel, dazed, the white powder from the airbag coating his fake uniform. Tommy was groaning in the passenger seat, his arm clearly broken. And Victor? Victor was stumbling out of his SUV, his expensive suit covered in dust, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. He looked at the wreckage, he looked at the bollards, then he looked at me. "You're a dead man, Sterling," he wheezed, clutching his chest. "No, Victor," I said, pointing to the cameras that had captured every frame of their high-speed assault. "I'm the witness, you're the defendant." The sirens were already wailing in the distance. The shadow war was over. The loud, messy, and very public downfall of Victor Blackwood had just begun. The dust hadn't even settled when the first real sirens began to wail, echoing off the limestone cliffs. This wasn't the high-pitched, chirpy siren of Derek's fake police cruiser. This was the deep, guttural roar of the county sheriff's heavy-duty interceptors. 3 units swept up the drive, kicking up a wall of gravel as they flanked the wreckage of the white sedan and Victor's black SUV. Sheriff Miller was the first one out. He didn't look like a man coming to help a friend. He looked like a man coming to clean up a biohazard. He didn't even look at me. He walked straight to the driver's side of the sedan, where Derek Sloan was still trying to untangle himself from the deflated airbag. "Out now," Miller commanded, his hand resting on the grip of his duty weapon. Derek, still dazed and bleeding from a gash on his forehead, tried to play the part one last time. "Sheriff, thank God, this lunatic," he set a trap. "We were on official HOA business." Miller didn't let him finish. He grabbed Derek by the collar of his Ridgewood security vest and yanked him out of the twisted metal. "You're wearing a badge you didn't earn, Derek. In this county, that's a felony. You're under arrest for impersonating a peace officer, criminal trespass, and reckless endangerment." The click-clack of the handcuffs was the most beautiful sound I'd heard in years. It was the sound of reality finally catching up to the lie. While Miller's deputies dealt with Tommy, who was screaming about his broken arm, I walked over to the black SUV. Victor Blackwood was leaning against the fender, trying to straighten his tie. His hands were shaking, but his eyes were still darting around, looking for an exit, a loophole, or someone to bribe. "Arthur," Victor hissed as I approached, "you've made a terrible mistake. This is a civil matter. My insurance will sue you for every penny of this ranch to cover these vehicles. You can't just plant tank traps in a driveway." "They aren't tank traps, Victor," I said, handing a thick folder to Sheriff Miller as he walked over. "They are DOT-approved S30 rated safety bollards. Here are the permits. Here is the engineering survey showing they are 10 feet behind my surveyed property line. And here," I pointed to the dashcam still mounted in his own SUV, "is the footage of your driver accelerating to 40 miles per hour into a clearly marked dead end." Miller flipped through the folder, then looked at the bright yellow bollards, then back at Victor. "Victor, I told you months ago to stay off this man's land. Now I've got 3 witnesses, my deputies, who just watched you follow a fake police car into a high-speed collision on private property." "I was just following my security detail," Victor shouted. "Your security detail is a group of uncertified thugs wearing counterfeit badges," Miller snapped. "Which makes you the financier of a criminal impersonation ring. Marcus Vance is already at the station, Victor. He's filed a RICO civil suit on behalf of the Sterling estate. But right now, you're coming with me for solicitation to commit a felony." Watching Victor Blackwood, the man who thought he could buy the horizon, being bent over the hood of a cruiser and searched like a common thief, was the Phase 2 I had been waiting for. As the tow trucks arrived to peel the sedan off the steel, one of the deputies looked at the center bollard. He kicked it with his boot. It didn't budge. He looked at me and shook his head. "What's in these things, Mr. Sterling?" "Lead." "Just concrete and the truth, deputy," I replied. "Turns out both are pretty hard to break." They cleared the wreckage, leaving nothing behind but a few shards of glass and a smear of white paint on the yellow steel. The ranch was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. The weight of the intimidation was gone. The vulture had been grounded. The courtroom in the county seat was quiet, but the air was thick with the scent of old paper and the weight of a final reckoning. Victor Blackwood sat at the defense table, his $3,000 suit looking wrinkled and defeated. Next to him, Derek Sloan and Tommy were in orange jumpsuits, their authority stripped away and replaced by the cold reality of a criminal record. I sat in the front row, holding the small locket Evelyn used to wear. I wasn't there for the money, though the settlement Marcus Vance negotiated was enough to ensure this ranch would stay in the Sterling name for another 100 years. I was there to see the truth recorded in the history books of this county. The evidence was undeniable. The 4K footage of the HOA cops harassing me, the thermal video of their midnight sabotage attempt, and the final, bone-crushing dashcam footage of their assault on the Bollards. The judge didn't even need an hour to deliberate. Derek Sloan was sentenced to 5 years for felony impersonation of a peace officer and aggravated assault. Tommy got 3 years for his role, but the real blow was dealt to Victor. The Blackwood Estates project was halted by a court-ordered injunction. His investors pulled out, his bank accounts were frozen, and he was ordered to pay $2.2 million in punitive damages for organized harassment and fraud. As the bailiffs led them away, Victor turned back to look at me. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was a man who realized that some things, like heritage, memory, and a man's boundary, can't be bulldozed. I drove back to the ranch as the sun began its slow descent behind the ridge. I pulled up to the gate and stopped. The yellow bollards were still there. They were scuffed and scarred, monuments to the battle that had been fought on this very spot. I got out of my truck, walked over to the center post, and ran my hand over the cold steel. It didn't just feel like a post anymore. It felt like a promise kept. I spent the next few months reclaiming the peace. I fixed the ruts they'd carved into my pastures. I replanted the grass they'd destroyed. And I took a blue paintbrush and carefully painted a single letter E on the side of the center bollard. Evelyn, because she was the reason I stayed. She was the reason I fought. A few months later, a black sedan pulled up to the gate. I felt my chest tighten for a second, but then I saw the official county seal. It was a surveyor. He rolled down his window and looked at the Bollards with a whistle of respect. "Mr. Sterling," he asked, "I'm here for the new county map update. We're officially marking this road as a permanent private access. No easements, no public throughway. It's on the books now." I nodded, leaning against the yellow steel. "Good to know, but honestly, son, the books are just catching up to what the steel already told him." He laughed, finished his notes, and drove away. I watched him go until his dust settled. The ranch was silent. The cattle were grazing. The legacy of Silas Sterling was safe. Boundaries aren't just about keeping people out. They're about protecting what's inside. They're about knowing who you are and what you stand for. My name is Arthur Sterling, and as long as I'm drawing breath, this land, this sacred, blood-bought soil, will never be for sale. Wake up if you think for 1 second that these corporate vultures and fake authorities are going to stop with Arthur Sterling. You are wrong. They are coming for your rights, your property, and your peace of mind next. Are you going to be the person who rolls over and signs the papers, or are you going to be the one who stands your ground? If you think Victor Blackwood got exactly what he deserved, I want you to smash that like button right now. Don't let the HOA cops of the world win. Comment "not for sale" below if you're ready to defend your boundaries. And if you want to see more stories of legendary justice and bullies getting absolutely wrecked, you better subscribe and hit that notification bell immediately. This is my land, this is my channel, and we don't back down. Get in the comments now.